Tēnā koutou katoa, malo le soifua, malo e la lei, warm Pacific greetings, everyone. I'm Warren Elwin, Chief Executive of Work Counts, and familiar with many in the room, but Work Counts helps organisations to develop and deliver IPS employment support. And we and the WISE Group are pleased to welcome Kristina to Aotearoa for this session, sharing experiences from Sweden on the implementation of two evidence-based practices, being IPS employment support and Housing First. So it is lovely again to have you here on. I always get confused whether this is the shortest day or was that yesterday. But lovely to see you here and welcome again. But first, hei karakia putu. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa punamu te moana. Hei huarahi ma tātou e te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. Hui e, tai ki. Whawhatai to all of the people who have provided stewardship for us to get to this point and who have offered hospitality to you, Kristina. Look, I want to say a few words about homelessness and employment support. I think if we are serious about breaking cycles of homelessness, then employment support must be an integral part of the solution. Secure housing alone is not enough, in my opinion. People need pathways to independence and stability and opportunity. And people shouldn't have to put their employment goals on hold because they have experienced homelessness or even just instability with their housing. The reality is that employment can be a foundation not just for the person but for intergenerational change, transforming households from long-term unemployment into working families. And simply put, having families that work sets people up for better long-term outcomes. I know that WorkWise has embedded employment support into the housing space over the past several years, working alongside of Link People and of the People's Project, both of whom deliver Housing First services. And we've seen that that sort of collaborations ensure that employment support's embedded as soon as it's needed and coordinated with a person's housing situation rather than being treated as an afterthought. We're really, from a Work Counts perspective, really keen to see more of that sort of work happening in this space, and that is why it's now my pleasure to introduce Kristina. Kristina is a researcher at the School of Social Work, Lund University, Sweden. She has a Bachelor of Science in Social Work, a Bachelor of Science in Social Anthropology, and Master of Arts in Cognitive Science. And as I understand it, Kristina, you've been working on the project Take Away Disinvestment of Established Methods when implementing new psychosocial interventions for homeless people and people with mental health problems. You've been doing that since 2018, yes. And you will finish your doctorate in early 2026.
Yes, I hope so.
Well, look, after hearing about findings from your research, there will be time for a Q&A session and networking as well. But again, welcome, kia ora, and over to you, Kristina.
Thank you. Okay, so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the help. Also, thank you to Carol, who is not here now. She's been absolutely lovely. Okay, so I'll just start. As Warren said, I've been part of the Takeaway project since 2018, and it looks at the disinvestment or the de-implementation of established methods when implementing Housing First and IPS. Okay? No. They always do this to me. So this is our research team. I thought I'd just introduce them. This is Ulrika Beijerholm. She's a professor in mental health, activity and participation at at Lund University, medical faculty. This is Susanne Johansson. She is her former student. She's an occupational therapist from the start, but now she has an MD and she's teaching at Göteborg University. The man in the middle, this is Werner Denvall, and he's kind of the man who pulled us all together. I'll come back to that. There you have me, of course. And here you have Markus Knutagård next to me. And he is really Mr. Housing First Sweden. He knows all of the Housing First stuff in Sweden. And I should also say that Ulrika is the Mrs. IPS Sweden, right? So you have your kind of picture of them. So Werner Denvall, just before 2018, and that's the man in the middle here, he thought, if we have these methods with such huge evidence, why are they not spread more? And he started thinking about creating spaces for the methods, kind of to get in there. And so he contacted Ulrika and Markus. Markus is also his former student. And yes, they started to kind of formulate a research hypothesis and research questions. So the hypothesis was that abandoning institutionalized or otherwise well-established ways of working is important when introducing new methods. And of course, the research questions for doing this was to look at what factors influence how established working practices are phased out in whole or in part, or are maintained in whole or in part. And at the time, this is when Susanne and I joined the project, and at the time we were all kind of expecting to find examples of methods being phased out in whole or in part. And we wanted to look at, what were the drivers of this de-implementation going on that we haven't looked at before. But it turned out that none were found, and rather we started thinking about de-implementation as a blind spot. That would be like not knowing that people were totally unaware, not knowing that they were not knowing that perhaps we could take something away, right? Okay, so, and of course it comes to this we're going to take something away. We can't just take everything away or just take anything away. So on a methods level, of course, we can take away low value methods, methods that are harmful, or methods where there are better alternatives. But as we kind of pursued our research, we also started to think that, perhaps we need to take away things that actually contradict the kernel or the core of the methods that we do implement. So this is one of kind of the thinking that we started And I should say that this is still like a work in progress. I'm soon to do my dissertation, but we're going to continue to do our research, and it's still like very tentative and trying to understand where we're going. So what did we find? Well, we found quite stealthy structures that were generating inequality, and we could also see that they were counteracting the implementation of Housing First and IPS. This is, as I said before, we started to think about like the need of an ongoing and combined implementation and de-implementation mindset kind of in monitoring the implementation of these methods. Meaning that, you know, always questioning kind of, because we tend not to do that, what can we actually take away here? And that would be with referring to the context, right? What can we actually take away from the context in order to make the methods fit? Because of course we know that we also have to manipulate a bit with the methods to them to fit context, but what we've been seeing is that there's more of an eating, that the context is kind of eating the methods, and that is of course an issue. So we've used quite a different set of theoretical tools in order to understand this. And I thought I'll try to go through the theoretical tools as we've used them, not in themselves, but as we use them. Because at least we've been finding that it makes us think small steps a bit differently, and it makes us talk a bit differently about these methods. So I thought I'll just go through them as we've used them. So we were looking at a municipality of about 60,000 inhabitants, and they wanted to introduce Housing First. They hadn't yet, but they asked us to please see how is our work organized and what does it generate, basically. So it was kind of a baseline for implementation of Housing First, right? And what we found was basically that municipal social work with homelessness were generating both durable homelessness for certain groups and also inequality in that. So in Sweden and in this municipality, we've seen that landlords kind of raise requirements to just have normal contracts. And municipalities then answer differently, because what happens is, of course, that we have more people who can't have a steady contract, so they come to the social work office and they say we need somewhere to live, right? Municipalities respond in different ways to this, but this municipality used what I think is quite famous for Sweden. It's called a second-hand contract, so they're basically subletting. And of course, what happens then is that the social services are taking on risks that the landlords don't need to, right? So there's a form of exploitation in this, to use the theoretical framework we did. But I should also say that we used Chile's theoretical framework, but only when we saw that there was like a very well empirical fit, right? Anyway, so what happened was there was pressure on the social services, and kind of forming a housing group, more or less kind of organically. And they started negotiating housing because they were better at negotiating flats. They could hoard more flats. So actually they closed all the other ways. Because before it would be like the social workers who were actually like working with the people who would say, look, I have a client and blah, blah, blah. The only thing was that when we interviewed them, they made it very clear that they'd been using a categorical divide that the landlords was using, and this categorical divide corresponded to deserving or undeserving. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of just, it just traveled into the organization, And it was very quickly institutionalized in the organization, which meant that, of course, suddenly the organization was reproducing inequality. And in Sweden, it's an explicit task of the social services nationwide. Social services are communal, municipal, but it is an explicit task to counteract inequality by law, and that's nationwide. And they weren't really knowing what they were doing. I wouldn't say they did this they wanted to solve an organizational problem. They needed flats, so they had to work in a way that the landlords could trust them. And that ended up in kind of incorporating this categorical divide into the operations of the social services. So, of course, the outcome was that many people could have apartments, but those were also people that were somehow having, risky apartments, being like subletted, and that needed no other help. While the people who would need who had more complex situations that would need complex support were excluded. And everything looked well, because they were in a good partnership. Everything was working out. Just that these people that they're supposed to work with were completely excluded, and the state-of-the-art social work had completely changed due to organizational issues. Yeah, so when they were about to implement Housing First, this was, of course, one of the things that we said, okay, we have to look at this categorical divide. How are you using it? And we have to look at the housing group. Is this things that we could be aware of and possibly de-implement or take away? So, and I shall also say probably in relation to this that one of the things we've been thinking of in relation to the implementation is always to know the local context. Because even if we see that there are some things that are very much in general, how it is upheld may be very different, and that may of course affect how to assess it. Yeah, to kind of make sense for everyone involved. So here we have something else. This is about IPS. This is another tool we used. It's a matrix from Jan and Porter, actually from the 1980s or 1981 or something like that. But this would correspond to authorities in Sweden. So say this would be like the SIA, the Swedish Social Insurance Agency, for example. We could have one here that would be the SPES, the Swedish Public Employment Agency, for example. Could be other ones as well, depending on which person you're working with, right? And IPS in Sweden would be dependent on these authorities for its performance, right? So the problem would be, because IPS would be this one, right? And here you would have the intersection practically between the IPS specialist, the service user, and one or more representatives of the authorities, right? And so we'd say that they have different institutional logics. Now, institutional logics are studied by how people act in general, but at the end of the day, it comes down to organizational principles or a major organizational principle that frames perceived possibilities of action, right? So, if you think here, this would be a meeting with different frames of perceived possibilities of action. That's hard. And so we did a survey where this was also very clear, and I thought I'll read two of the quotes for you. It says, "The complexity of the IPS works contrary to the regulations of the administrative authorities." And the next one would be, IPS collides with the regulations of the Social Insurance Agency, which could mean that people on sickness benefit from SIA, or the Social Insurance Agency, cannot be in IPS. Right? So this is probably where we got the farthest conceptually in thinking combined implementation and de-implementation, as we actually suggested to the politicians, basically, to invest further into the possibility of creating IPS tracks, right? So that would mean that in the authorities there would be people who are specially trained and understand recovery, understand IPS logics, and also that budgeting would be something else, right? We would look at like what do we need to make IPS actually possible to perform, right? So that's probably where we got the farthest, thinking this combined IPS or implementation and de-implementation, as these tracks would go this way, and they would be objectifying assessments, and they would basically eat the method. They would counteract the performance of the IPS in large. There is always possibilities to go through and save a bit of it, but it requires loads of competence and time, and at the end of the day it would still be, it would take too long time, it would compromise the right of choice, and so yeah, that's where we got with that. So this would be something that we call organizational inertia, right? So this would be a picture of the teamwork, kind of, in an IPS team, where we could see that many times the IPS specialists end up here, and the teamwork end up like this, which means it is quite segmented teamwork, where each of the professions are talking their own lingo, and actually making quite a patched work of the individual that is also increasingly objectified. Whilst we would want it, right, to be an integrated team that could work with focus on the individual and could kind of enhance the individual, that would be like what we want IPS to be. And this picture, I've chosen this because it also kind of shows that, this kind of shows of the importance of thinking implementation and de-implementation, because it would be like a layered implementation, where one could see that, the old ways of working, they're still there. The roots are still there. And the IPS or employment specialist, it's just like, oh, here's another root to the tree, So we would kind of, we'd think that is quite like layer on layer, or like plus menu implementation, rather than kind of going deeper into it, into the nitty-gritty. So as I said, it is a work in progress, but what we've kind of worked with is to identify, to highlight, to think about these things, and also to assess, like, where does it happen? Where are core principles counteracted? When are they? How are they? By what function are they? And then kind of to assess that. And how you assess that has to, of course, be in relation to the local context. But that's kind of where we are now. So these are some of the publications. And this is my friend saying thank you. So, yeah. That's it for me.
Right. Thanks, Kristina. I just wonder if you can talk a little bit more about de-implementation, about stopping things or unlearning things that when you are delivering integrated services. Can you just talk a little bit more with some examples of what you could let go?
I could try. Yeah, so I think I'll go back to this is a good one, right? Because I think it makes clear that kind of we have to think that everyone needs to change, and that also means that everyone has to let go of certain things that we may not be too happy to let go of. Whether it's, feeling secure in your professional role, that you assess people through a certain perspective, or, So it's, that would be one of the examples. And it would be, I guess it would also be very hurtful, and we knew it was quite hurtful in the municipality that we studied with the housing group. Because of course it's thinking that you've acted in a good way, and that could really happen to anyone, I think. Learning that, the consequences of it wasn't that good. The consequences of it were actually really bad. That's hard, and that's hard as a manager to communicate. It's hard to take in that this happened to you, and it's also hard not to feel bitter, because you did so much for the organization. You hoarded all of these apartments, right? And you also got appreciation and status from that. I mean, status was also a part of kind of what happened there. So I would say it's, if there's anything in general, because it's really hard to talk in general, actually. This is why I'm doing kind of the examples very much locally here. I would say it's the letting go, right? And the feeling that, I did my best. It didn't end up in anything that I wanted, and it's hard to face that, but I'll have to face it. Others have to face it. We have to kind of get together and let go and go on. And you seem to be really good at that here. We're not so good at that in Sweden.
Just one thing, I just want to know, Kristina, with the time that you spent here, what's your takeaway from what you've learned about how we do things at the WISE Group?
Yeah, it would be, I think what I'm most impressed by, and that we're not so good at in Sweden, is the, becoming a person when meeting the other, right? And holding to that, because for me that's also part of recovery. That's part of these methods. That's part of, and we tend to have quite a squared system where there's a lot of inbuilt mechanisms pushing to different kind of assessments and objectifications of people. And we also have massive problems with loneliness and isolation and these kind of things. So I think it's the connecting part that I'm really impressed with, and that I think that we need to learn to kind of relive or because to me it turns to that, if you're objectified and you objectify, and it kind of goes every level, whilst if you meet persons, it doesn't matter. It's not only about the service users, right? It's also about who gives the services. It's about everyone at the end. So I think that would be kind of what I've what I appreciate the most, and what I definitely will kind of keep in my heart and try to somehow, make grow in Sweden. Yeah.
All right, look, thank you
Thank you.
for taking time out of your holiday, actually, to come and do this. And we appreciate it. And I think your research has certainly given me food for thought. I just want to reiterate that message that we do have opportunity to bring housing to and employment more robustly together. And you've sort of given me impetus to be braver and stronger when I'm talking about implementation, when I'm talking about research, when I'm talking about what works with people who commission services and who structure policy as we move forward. So I thank you for that, and wish you well on the rest of your time here in Aotearoa.
Okay, thank you.
Let's just give Kristina another round of appreciation, and Rewere, I might ask you to close if that's okay.